Viper's been one of my favorite agents in the game literally ever since the inception of Valorant. I thought her toxic mechanic and the entire theme of her character were really unique and interesting, and I was super excited to push the limits of what she could do. However, it doesn't really look like much of the player base agrees with this, as she's one of the most unpopular agents in the game. Even with a major rework pushing her to competitive viability, she still refuses to be played no matter what. What is it that Viper's kit that refused her to let her be super popular like the other agents? This is what we're here to find out. Quick reminder to get subscribed if you haven't yet, and onto the video. The sheer refusal of the community to play Viper likely comes from a few factors that come together that actually makes Viper's day-to-day experience within Valorant less than ideal. Some of them have to do with Viper's gameplay herself, while some others relate to the unfortunate circumstances that a character of her nature has to deal with. I digress. It is this unfortunate mix of things that puts her in the situation where she is today and would be hard for Riot to fix easily. So let's get into things. Starting with a more direct approach, let's quickly talk about Viper's kit in general and why her overall playstyle may be a cause to why she doesn't really feel that fun to play for most people. Dumbing it down to the utmost level, Valorant really is a game with characters, and naturally we are going to gravitate to the characters that we find the most fun and exciting to play. When we choose Viper's kit, it's very easy to consider it pretty unwieldy and quirky at first, making it hard to understand the value proposition that Viper is supposed to bring. It's put up pretty nice and up center that Viper's value as an agent is supposed to be as this giant deadly smoke bomb, with every ability revolving around her poison. And with no forms of hard CC or flashes, she definitely relies on relatively slow controlling gameplay, which is all fine but at the same time uninteresting. Her abilities are fairly low impact and more so get leverage for her team rather than look flashy, and provide the Viper player with opportunities to look cool in front of her opponent, so many players don't end up fragging a lot on the agent, nor do they end up even looking good in the process. And unlike other controlling agents like Sage or Brimstone, Viper is much more difficult than both of them, and her effectiveness is much harder to appreciate than either of these agents. I for one think a good Viper can entirely make the enemy team suffer, but being able to reach that point on Viper takes quite a commitment from the player, one that most people aren't going to have the patience for, and instead would move on to one of these other easier or more fun agents. This leads to the next big issue with Viper. On top of not necessarily feeling that impactful compared to other agents in her role, Viper is an agent that requires a lot of time, effort, and skill building in order to truly take advantage of. She's really not that intuitive to play, and you've ever first-timed her in a game, you might have experienced that firsthand. There's not much she can provide for herself in terms of combat abilities, and everything she has long cast times, generally reveals her location, and can be pretty predictable to players who aren't as experienced on her. Of course, as you commit more games onto the agent, you learn new things, you start to pick up the lineups, and you change your playstyle to accommodate that. And as a result, you start to get more success. Her wall, smokes, and pit are very creative and interesting tools once you begin to understand them, but most players will quit playing the agent by the time they'll be able to reap the rewards. There's a certain feel to knowing how to mind game your opponent and whether they'll think you're in the pit, behind your smoke, etc. There may be even situations where you can do things like create smoke terrain with the wall, hide inside your orb, the list goes on and on. These are things that you would only start to think about with a certain amount of games and reps on the agent, but only through many failures will you be able to understand this. The last big thing I want to talk about here that makes Viper pretty unpopular in solo queue relates to her dynamic in solo queue. As we already established, her abilities don't provide much impact on their own and don't provide much value to Viper herself when it comes to winning trades, especially against duelists who have a myriad of these kinds of tools. This essentially means that Viper is pretty team reliant in her playstyle, which makes her really hard to succeed because of this. Another bad situation that comes out of this is that Viper players often get flamed when they want to play a certain way. It's actually extremely viable and is good for Viper players to lurk sometimes, as her abilities are so large and draw so much pressure. However, your teammates aren't going to understand this a lot of the time, and you actually get flamed because of this. Or maybe you want to push onto a site together with your team, put down your abilities to support it, but your team doesn't listen to the call, and now your wall is already committed to the site. There's a lot of ways where Viper can just get cocked in game, and every time this happens, this creates that negative experience associated with her that makes her pretty unapproachable and unhealthy in terms of gameplay. In team play, this is not really an issue, but since most of the metagame is going to be defined by solo queue experiences, and for Viper, it's not so hot. So here's the main reasons for why I think Viper is so unpopular and so unenjoyable for much of the community. It's quite a shame considering how fun I think she is and how much potential she has for making the meta super creative. However, I do think that these are the main issues, and it's going to be pretty hard for her to get out of this rut. That's it from me though, and I will see you guys in the next one. Stay fresh.